This session on giving feedback is designed for the Yorkshire Diocese Supervision Skills course, though I hope the principles here may be relevant to all aspects of our ministry. Feedback helps us to grow. We all benefit from feedback, but especially at the start of our ministry, when we're doing things for the first time. Yet curates repeatedly complain that they don't get feedback from their incumbents, or if they specifically ask for it, it can then be critical and discouraging. If your curate does a particular task and you don't give feedback, they may interpret this as disapproval. I know when I was a curate, my trainee incumbent never gave me feedback on my sermons. I thought this meant he thought they were so bad he couldn't bring himself to say anything about them. Eventually I asked, and he said, "No, your sermons are fine. If there was a problem, I would have said something." Or, if you rarely or never give any feedback, then your curate will probably interpret that as a lack of care. There are two types of feedback. Feedback can either be positive, praising and reinforcing what has gone well, or constructive, offering a way to improve what could have been done better. If you set any store by Myers-Briggs, there is a difference here between feeling types and thinking types. Feeling types are good at giving positive feedback, but may find it hard to give constructive feedback for fear of hurting the other's feelings. On the other hand, thinking types can be better at giving constructive criticism. They are good at being objective and they're fair, but they may forget the curate needs positive feedback and affirmation too. I'd like to share an experience from my student days on teaching practice. I had a class of 13-year-olds, and one table of 4 boys produced some particularly poor work at the end of the first week. I told them off, and the second week their work got worse. Then I remembered a lecture at college about the power of praise to change behaviour, and I thought, this is a chance to try it out. So the third week, I praised anything they did. "Well done, you've written your name. That's great, you got the date done as well." By the end of that week, they produced better work than they had the previous 2 weeks. I continued, and by the end of term, their effort was as great as from any table in the class. I was amazed at the power of positive feedback. On the other hand, negative feedback is likely to trigger a defensive reaction. That might be a prickly response, or denial, or maybe even tearfulness. So, constructive feedback has to be given in a relationship of trust. Trust that you have their well-being at heart. If there's too much criticism, then defensiveness can become habitual, and that can be a barrier to learning. So, constructive criticism always has to be given in a context of regular affirmation. Before you give constructive feedback, I suggest you prepare in this way. First of all, check your motives. Are you doing this because this will help them to grow, or because you want to show them how much more you know, or because someone else has passed on a criticism to you and asked you to tell them? It's good to offer our motives to God in prayer for discernment. Then assess the consequences. What's their current confidence level like? Is this criticism likely to nurture them or to knock them back? Do they really need to hear this now? Or can this issue wait until they're ready to hear it later on in their curacy? Acknowledge your feelings. If this is a sensitive issue, you probably feel awkward and nervous about raising it. It can require courage to overcome the temptation of avoidance. Again, we need to pray for this. When we're awkward or nervous, our words can often come out wrong. It might be better to try out in your mind how to phrase this, rather than trust it will be okay at the time. Timing is important. If you're giving feedback on an incident, for instance, a service, don't leave it too long, preferably not more than a week. On the other hand, it can be better to reflect rather than launch into it unprepared. Never give constructive criticism in a place where you could be overheard. Always do it one-to-one in private. Always do it face-to-face and never by email. It's sometimes said we should give criticism in a compliment sandwich. You praise them, then you offer suggestion for improvement, and then you praise them again. That in itself is a helpful reminder of the need for a context of praise, for constructive criticism to be heard. But the danger is, if we do it in a formulaic way, that praise can just sound insincere, only a prelude to sweeten your criticisms. So that's preparation. Here's an outline of how you might like to approach the actual conversation. Be direct. I'd like to talk about, and then be specific. This particular task, this occasion, this example of your behaviour. Avoid generalizations. Avoid saying things like, I think you're lazy. Instead, give specific examples. I gave you this task, and we set a deadline, and you still haven't done it. Own your criticisms, not people have noticed, but I have noticed. Describe the impact of their behaviour. For instance, when you were looking at your phone during the PCC meeting last week, I felt that was disrespectful to the members of the PCC, and the treasurer, who was talking at the time, told me afterwards how off-putting he found it. Offer an alternative. For instance, I know you like to make notes on your phone. I suggest you either make written notes or explain in advance that you're using your phone in this way to avoid any misunderstanding. Then give them a chance to respond. Can you see what I'm saying? What do you think? Make it a dialogue rather than just you talking. And finally, agree a course of action. And then make sure you follow up on that with further feedback. Either, we agreed this, but I noticed nothing has changed, or, I really appreciate you took that on board. I thought it made a big difference. In summary, feedback should be clear and understandable, owned, in my opinion, regular, ideally after each service or during each supervision session. It should be balanced with affirmation and suggestions for improvement, specific and never general or personal, and timely. Perhaps not surprisingly, I couldn't find any videos of training incumbents giving feedback to a curate. However, there are plenty of videos on the internet of how to give feedback. Here's a couple which I found interesting and amusing by Shari Harley, author of the book How to Say Anything to Anyone, including to tell them that they smell.